Well, well, well. Who's surprised? A giant UFC event that should be UFC 317 International Fight Week, which is a massive card. We all know that International Fight Week is always one of the biggest deals of the year when it comes to the UFC. And I'm getting UFC 300 vibes here, which means we may end up getting a good card for UFC 317, but I don't think that we are going to get what we are all kind of expecting for UFC 317. And I don't believe that it is because, the fights aren't there. The UFC is fucking around. And I am getting sick and fucking tired of the UFC fucking around. And we're going to talk about what I mean by fucking around, because I understand that we got some fighters that, want specific matchups or don't want this fight, want that fight, need this money, need this, need that, blah, blah, blah. We get it. There's all sorts of bullshit going on. It's driving me fucking nuts, man. As a UFC fan, I don't remember it ever being so difficult to make the big fights happen, put things together instead of what seems like we're heading into a UFC 317 where it's just like, it feels like it's in shambles. It feels like behind the scenes, like the building's on fire and everyone's like, what do we do for UFC 317? What do we do? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me. So in this video, we're going to talk about really where the first time I tried to record this, people in the other room, my family in the other room thought something bad was happening to me because I was getting so damn mad. So I'm going to try to keep it, all right here. But I'm frustrated, man, because we were supposed to be getting Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev for UFC 317. Now, might say, Jake, we don't know that. How do we know for sure? We just heard Kevin Iole report on this and, whatever. But that to me is the telltale sign that gave this away. I mean, Kevin Iole, he's about as legit as it gets when it comes to credible sources, when it comes to the fight game. I mean, whenever he says something, he's got the hookups, man. He's got the connection. So I feel like there's a lot of legitimacy to what Kevin Iole is going to report, obviously. And this is kind of a giveaway to me. He says Dricus Du Plessis has reportedly picked up an injury and will no longer be able to potentially face Khamzat Chimaev in their anticipated matchup at UFC 317. So what I want to do is I'm going to react to this. Forgot to talk about that. I'm going to react to this. I'm going to go over some possible options for UFC 317. We're going to talk about what's going on at middleweight right now and I'll kind of matchmake, and we'll go over all that. I'm frustrated, man. I'm frustrated because I was waiting to make this video to see if we had any other news come about a few days after this all kind of unfolding, and it's been crickets. It's been absolutely crickets. And to me, that we all kind of were anticipating this. Khamzat Chimaev goes out there and steamrolls Robert Whittaker at UFC 308. We all know the title shot's next. We all know a title shot's next, right? That's absolutely the best business move for the UFC. Dana White and the UFC are all about business, aren't they? Well, then why the hell do we have undeserved title shots? Sean Strickland go in there and get a rematch with Dricus Du Plessis, a fight that it could have happened down the line, sure, but that was not the hot hand. The hot hand was to take Khamzat Chimaev, who, to all of our knowledge, at least mine, I don't think that anything was wrong with Khamzat after he butchered Robert Whittaker in one round. When you do that, you should be turning around and immediately fighting for a title shot ASAP. He could have fought DDP in February, right? And I get that there's all sorts of different things going into that. We don't know all the intricacies behind the scenes. This was bullshit. It sounded like the UFC had promised Sean Strickland a rematch and all these different things, and you have people out there that were actually of the mindset that this was going to be some great fight again, and we sat up here for however long, we're like, DDP's just better, man. Sean Strickland's not going to beat this guy. He's going to go in there, jab and tape, and do the same bullshit over and over again, and we wasted a fucking title fight, man. It should have been Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus Du Plessis. So I'm going all over the place, I get it. But the point is this. The UFC is fucking around. We could have already had this fight, man. We could have already had this fight. And then this is what happens that the UFC is clearly not learning. They almost fumbled the DDP versus Adesanya fight, by the way. Remember that? When they decided, we're just going to have Izzy go in there and fight Sean Strickland. In the meantime, Izzy wants to stay active. And then we'll eventually book the Adesanya versus Dricus fight. The problem is, This is the fight game. Anything can happen. Shit happens. Life happens. And DDP is one of those guys, man. He's made it very clear before. If he is compromised, he is not going to step in there and risk it. And now he's in a very different position because, by the way, he went in there against Robert Whittaker and was compromised. And I believe he made things worse. And that's why he couldn't turn around and fight Adesanya, which he shouldn't have done anyway. The UFC and Izzy were trying to get him while he was compromised. I've said that, for a long time. I think a lot of us feel that way. But, I got to be honest, I don't blame DDP. I don't blame him. Now, he was talking a bunch of shit about Khamzat and this and that and, don't catch a cold and all that other stuff. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to pull out of the fight, big dog, like, you know what I'm saying? You got to watch what you got to say there. But DDP's a champion, man. The amount of money that you make when you're the champion compared to when you're not, other than if you're some sort of household name, it is substantial. So to go in there against what I think is going to be his toughest challenge in Khamzat Chimaev, I would want to be 100% as well. The bottom line is this, though. Fighters never come in 100%. We don't know all the details of what's going on. In this fight, to our knowledge, this was not like what for sure was going to be the headliner for UFC 317. But when Kevin Iole reports this, it definitely sounds like this is the route that the UFC was trying to go, right? I feel like we all kind of felt that way. It's like, this is a massive fight, man. Khamzat Chimaev is an absolute superstar. We've all been waiting for him to fight for the title. It would have made all the sense in the world. He's been, he's had, he's been sick and all these different things. And it's like we finally felt like we could have some momentum here with Chimaev. Get him in there. Get him in this big fight. Big spotlight, International Fight Week. Felt like all the stars were aligning to have this, what seems like is going to fall through. So at the end of the day, DDP's a champion, man, and he's going to do what he's going to do. And if he's like, I'm injured, we don't know the extent of the injury and all these different things, he's not going to show up and take on a tough challenge in Khamzat Chimaev. Now, me, I'm a fan of DDP, but you guys know my favorite fighter is Khamzat Chimaev, and I want to see him in there against DDP. So, of course, I'm fucking pissed that for International Fight Week, it seems like we are not going, unless this is some crazy misdirection and there's been some misunderstanding, whatever the hell, which it doesn't sound like that's the case, then this seems like it's off the table for UFC 317. But the bottom line is that's the fight to make. Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus Du Plessis, that is the fight to make. But this is why the UFC can't fuck around. We could have already seen the DDP versus Khamzat fight, but we just had to have, an absolute whatever, oh my God, we had to have Sean Strickland versus DDP in a rematch. The rematch that almost no one wanted to see. Granted, the first time, it was a pretty good fight, I give you that. But in the rematch, we knew Strickland was going to do the same thing and DDP was going to make the adjustments. It was a horrible fight. And for Sean Strickland to basically get an undeserved title shot after going out there and playing patty cake with Paulo Costa for 25 minutes, and he gets a title shot off of that, and that got in the way of Khamzat getting to go in there against DDP. Like, the UFC fucks around and doesn't make the right matchups at the times that they're supposed to be happening. That's where the UFC's missing, man. It's all of these small things leading up. The small little things add up to cause major issues. That's what we're seeing with the UFC. The big fights aren't happening. The big, super fights, everything that is supposed to make the sport feel big. The UFC, that's what was really, on the run there for a while, was we were getting those big fights. We were getting these guys who are stars and superstars. The UFC just couldn't wait to get them into a title shot. It doesn't seem like it just doesn't seem like that to me anymore. Doesn't seem like that to me anymore. And I'm frustrated because, Khamzat Chimaev, of course, he's going to be frustrated. He says DDP is reportedly, Dricus is reportedly injured, may not be able to fight, according to Kevin Iole. Khamzat reacts to the news. Brother, these guy big bullshit, right? And I get it. Khamzat's frustrated. He's like, I want to get in there. I want to fight for the title. And, him and DDP have been jousting back and forth. And this is a massive fight, man. It's a massive fight. I'm not going to say it's like a super fight because that would be like a champ versus champ, two giant names. Like, I don't think it's a super fight, but it's a massive fight. I think that this is one of the biggest fights that is realistic, right? We're not talking about a dream board matchup where it's like, we need this guy to skip 3 weight classes and put these big names against it. Like, stylistically, this is incredibly intriguing. This is an unbelievable matchup. Nobody's been able to solve DDP. Khamzat has been unsolved as well. The grappling style of Khamzat Chimaev, the freak athlete that he is, going in there against DDP, who's very unorthodox but always finds a way to win. It doesn't get more intriguing than a fight like this. And it's just disappointing that it sounds like, yes, we don't know for sure that it was going to be the UFC 317 headliner, but it sounds like this is the direction that they were trying to go. So it's frustrating that it doesn't sound like we're going to get this. And again, like I said, DDP is not going to go in there compromised, man. And as the champion, like if Khamzat was the champ, I would be like, don't go in there and take on a dangerous challenge if you're compromised, right? There's different things between being nicked and then being actually injured, right? Where Conor McGregor's like, I got a broken toe and this and that. It's like, we see fighters go in there and compete with that kind of stuff. We don't know the specific of the DDP injury. It's just kind of crazy because he was out there talking all this shit on Khamzat, and now he's the one that sounds like he's pulling out of the fight. But again, we don't know the specific details, so I'm not going to judge on that. I get it. Khamzat's frustrated. He's been waiting, took basically no damage against Robert Whittaker's, ready to rock and roll. DDP goes in there and basically gets a gift of a rematch against John Strickland. I know that Strickland's still, a tough fight, but come on, man. Like, let's be real. It should have been Khamzat versus DDP, and this is what happens. UFC fucks around, and we don't get to see some of the matchups that we really want to see, and now this is in jeopardy, because now the UFC, and we'll talk about that in a second, but here's DDP's reply. Let's take a look at the last 2.5 years and tell me who's bullshit, and then he just matched up his past fights since 2022, and then Khamzat's and all these different things. And the bottom line is, yeah, Khamzat missed weight against Nate Diaz. And it's like, I had been saying for a while, I'd like to see Khamzat at 185 pounds. That weight cut has got to be awful. Getting down to welterweight. Again, Paulo Costa, he's the one that pulled out of the fight. And then, they had to put Kamaru Usman in there on short notice. Khamzat got incredibly ill, so they had to reschedule the Robert Whittaker fight. So really not Khamzat's issue, man. Right? Like at the end of the day, and yeah, the fight was canceled with Nate Diaz. He still ended up competing against Kevin Holland and absolutely destroyed him, right? And then DDP's been on a fucking tear. He's been running through everybody, right? So that's what makes this fight so massive. But at the end of the day, it sounds like there's some juggling going on with the idea of an interim title fight. And, I'm hearing all this and I'm like, okay, interim title. And the UFC, it doesn't really like to do interim titles, right? In the past, they kind of were so quick to do an interim title to where as we've, gotten through the years here, they're not so quick to just throw an interim title out there because it causes disasters. And it's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. The problem is when you have a massive star like Khamzat Chimaev, who sounds like he is preparing for a fight and is, entering camp and all the different things we've been hearing, they're going to want to get Khamzat in there. And International Fight Week, it's going to come down to how much does the UFC really want Khamzat featured on this card? I think that's something a detail people are missing, right? They're so quick to be like, well, we're just going to postpone DDP versus Khamzat and do it in the summer or whenever DDP's ready and all this and that. But I think the UFC was hell-bent on having Chimaev compete at International Fight Week. I just really believe that. And that's going to come down to what do they think is going to make the most sense? How bad do they want him on this card? How bad does Chimaev want to fight on this card? And I think Khamzat is willing to really just do whatever. If there's an interim belt on the line, I think that Khamzat is going to take the fight. Now, the problem is this. It sounds like if it's going to happen, it's leaning in the direction of Khamzat versus Caio Borralho, right? And then again, I don't blame Caio one bit, right? He's a guy, he's, with the fighting nerds, and we know about the momentum and all the, hype that these guys are creating, and I don't blame him wanting to throw his name in the mix and shoot a shot, see what happens. What's the worst thing they can say? Nope. You know what I mean? He's given it his best go. The issue is this. Nasruddin Imavov, if anybody should be getting a crack outside of Khamzat for a title, it's 150% Nasruddin Imavov, who's figured it out, who has been on a nice run here, just went out there and KO'd Israel Adesanya. Why would Caio Borralho basically get to skip the opportunity that Nasruddin Imavov has earned? Right? So to say that it would be Caio Borralho, that's disrespectful to Imavov, right? That's just the facts. It's disrespectful to Imavov, but selfishly for me, I only want to see Khamzat Chimaev versus Nasruddin Imavov unless it's for the undisputed title. And to be honest with you, I don't want to see Khamzat fighting for an interim title. I want it to be against Dricus Du Plessis for an undisputed title. And I think that this is a fun fight. Don't get me wrong. I think Khamzat wins, but this shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. There no way, shape, or form should Imavov be left out of the equation. And like I said, I don't want to see Khamzat and Imavov fighting unless it's for an undisputed title. So it puts us in this weird position. Like, I think it's fun, right? And you see Khamzat saying, if we will fight 100 times, you'll never win. If somebody knows, you know that, bro, right? We've heard that they've trained together, and it sounds like Khamzat was getting a lot better of the exchanges and when these guys were training. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. I'd rather not have this. I don't want to have, if Khamzat's going to be competing, I want to see it against Dricus Du Plessis, because you never know. He could go in there and, he could win, and who knows? And the fight game is very crazy, man. When you have these big fights, you have to book them, because eventually time goes on, injuries happen, life happens, all this different stuff, and then the fights we really want to see don't happen. So I think that the UFC realistically is going to look to do Khamzat versus DDP at some other point. But this is the reality of this fight. Like what you saw in the training, Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion, just takes down Caio Borralho, gets to his back, and just subs his ass. I think it's an interesting fight, right? And I think Caio understands how to, he's trying to, get to the fans, get everyone riled up and all this and that. And I don't blame him. Like I said, trying to get a title shot and shooting his shot, that fight shouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, if the UFC and Khamzat are hell-bent on having him perform at International Fight Week, it wouldn't shock me if this happens. I don't want to see it, though. I don't want to see it. I want to see Khamzat fighting DDP for the undisputed title. That is the most intriguing fight in the division right now. And here's what I would do, right? Because we have a lot of different things going on at middleweight right now, right? We have a loaded 185-pound division. But we have a problem. Like I said, Nasruddin Imavov is just getting left out of the equation. And this is what I said before. I love fighters like Nasruddin that have this quiet, respectful approach where they're like, look, man, I don't really need to talk much. I'm just going to go in there and back it up with my skill. That's exactly what he did against Israel Adesanya. It's exactly what he did against Brendan Allen. And that's what we've seen from Nasruddin, is just going in there and putting on outstanding performances. But what happens is when you get someone like Caio Borralho, who's also winning in the division, while I think Nasruddin is clearly the guy that should be fighting for, whether it's an interim belt or the undisputed title, if it's not Khamzat, it should be Nasruddin Imavov before it is Caio Borralho. But when guys talk smack, when they rile people up, when they get their names in the headlines by talking crazy, sometimes you get to skip the line, and that type of behavior will be rewarded because it generates, hype and all those different things. And that is my concern for Nasruddin moving forward here. But, and then we saw this, right? Let him beat a top 5 guy. Let him prove he's worth it like I did. Then I'll knock him out. And that was Imavov talking about a potential matchup with Caio Borralho. I would love to see this fight. I think that Khamzat versus DDP is the fight to make, like I've been saying. And then the winner of this fight is next in line for the winner of DDP versus Khamzat. But now you're at an interesting point because DDP, he's been a great champion. He's taken on all these challenges. And, he's been saying even before the Strickland rematch, he wanted to fight Khamzat Chimaev. So we know that they may give DDP an immediate rematch, but the way that Dana seems to kind of act towards DDP wouldn't surprise me if they don't give him a rematch. It seems like they're just trying to get DDP off the throne, to be honest with you. I'm just kind of speculating there, but we've seen Dana doesn't seem to be the biggest fan of Dricus Du Plessis. A lot of that probably because DDP isn't so willing to get in there, even if he is a little bit compromised. So again, strategic play by DDP, but the bottom line is, in my opinion, this is a fun fight. I think Nasruddin Imavov finishes Caio Borralho. Then he stamps himself as the clear, he already basically is, but I think in the meantime, this would be a very good fight here. It's a competitive fight. It's a fun fight, but I think Nasruddin Imavov would win it. But I think it's a good fight. And I think that it would help build up Imavov as well, because Borralho will talk shit. He'll try to build it up. And then this is the reality. Chimaev versus DDP. Wait till, if DDP's actually injured and this is what's going on, let's get him healthy. Let's get Khamzat ready to go. And let's book this fight, I guess. Like we said, we don't know the injuries here, but let's get this fight done this year, hopefully in the summer, whenever it would be. And then, gets the next shot. Nasruddin Imavov versus Caio Borralho. True number 1 contender fight. Put it on the same card as DDP versus Khamzat. Make it a 5-round co-main event or something, right? Or at least put it on the card. Or maybe they even try to add this at International Fight Week. I don't know what they're going to do, but it just sounds like the UFC is all over the place right now. Imavov, yes, he has earned a title shot, but it's the fact that Khamzat is the guy that's getting the next shot. And so it's like, on Imavov, do you want to sit and wait? Or do you want to take on a guy like Caio Borralho, get another finish, stamp yourself, go in there and whatever? Like, I understand why he would want to wait for a shot, but we've seen what happens to guys when they wait. You know what I mean? Like, I think Imavov has put himself in position. He's just found himself in a weird spot because Khamzat Chimaev has also earned the title shot. So that's what I would do. I would do DDP Chimaev. I would do Imavov versus Caio Borralho. Badass fights either way. UFC 317 options. Now that we got through all that with the middleweight mess and all that, We have options, I think, for UFC 317. The problem is this. We don't know all the behind the scenes of what's actually going on. We don't know if the UFC has a fight that it just seems like it's on the tip of their tongue. They're just waiting for a couple things to go through, and then all is going to be good. Maybe we get Kai Kara-France versus Pantoja as a co-main, and sounds like they, could build out a solid card. But the headliner it's so important, man. Obviously on a pay-per-view, but especially for International Fight Week in 2025, where it was supposed to be a massive year for the UFC. We know about the TV rights deals and all these different things going on. And, there's been that speculation. I've even said, look, maybe the UFC's holding on to some of these big fights until they kind of figure out what's going on with that. And I think that there might be some truth to that. But I'm starting to question it a little bit. I'm starting to wonder, is it just the fact that these fights are just not going to happen, right? Are we not going to get an Aspinall versus Jones? Are we not going to get Islam versus Elias? Some of these big fights, it just seems like maybe there's some of this bad, clouds floating over these fights like we just may never see them. I don't know, but here's what I think some of the options could be. I see a scenario to where the UFC calls Islam Makhachev. We even saw Kevin Iole in that article. He's basically saying that Islam's services, could be needed here for UFC 317 because it sounds like DDP versus Khamzat was the direction the UFC was going to go. Obviously, we never heard for sure. But, for Kevin Iole to say that sounds like that's what the UFC was going to do. I could see any of these being realistic options here. I could see Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria, which I've said time and time again, whether you think Ilia should be getting the shot or not, put all of it to the side. It's a massive fight, and your ass is going to watch it. And a lot of people are going to watch it because it gives you the big fight feel. You have Ilia Topuria with the boxing. He's undefeated. He just KO'd Volk and Holloway, and Islam has this crazy aura at lightweight. It is a massive fight, and we've heard Ilia going on these podcasts saying that he would sub Islam and all these different things. Or, if that doesn't happen, we get Islam versus Arman Tsarukyan in the rematch. And it better not be Islam versus Justin Gaethje. It better not be. And anyone that thinks that fight should happen, you're out of your fucking mind, and I don't even know what to say to you. I don't even know what to say to you. Because that's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. Justin Gaethje needs at least another win before you can throw him back into a title situation. I get he's older, he's a name, he's been around, but it's not a competitive fight. It's basically a cherry-picked title defense at that point. Islam versus Ilia is one of the biggest fights in the UFC. Outside of Aspinall and Jones, Islam versus Topuria is massive. That is a huge fight, and that the buildup would be amazing. But if that doesn't happen, I'm also very happy with Islam versus Arman too. The problem is UFC going to give Arman the opportunity considering what happened at UFC 311 where he basically pulled out the day before the fight? So if the UFC doesn't hold it against Arman, which I feel like they might, then that's also a good option. That's a big fight. It's the highly anticipated rematch. I would be happy with that. Again, the Ilia fight, that's the big one that sets things over the top. Then we have Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pineda running the rematch back. Now, we've heard Ankalaev saying, like, hey, I'm ready for a rematch, man. And there were kind of some hints from him that could be in August or this summer. Who is the guy that the UFC would call whenever they're like, we fucked up. We got nothing. We have no headliners. We don't have anyone. We can't put a title on the line. What the hell do we do? They would call Poatan for his services. That was their fallback plan all the time, as they knew as champion, which is why they gave him favorable matchups. As much as I like Poatan, they definitely gave him favorable matchups because he was someone that they could always request his service, meet his, price. I'm sure they did him, some financial favors because he would take these fights on short notice at times, right? Especially at UFC 300 against Hill when they were struggling for a main event, and then UFC 303 to save International Fight Week last year. Pineda did them some favors. I'm sure that they are looking at exploring Ankalaev versus Pineda too, because the rematch would be big. Pineda's a big star. Ankalaev went out there, and I'm a big fan of Magomed Ankalaev, man. You guys know that. And this would be a fun rematch because I think that we would see some good adjustments by both. I think we would see a finish by somebody in the rematch. I would lean towards Ankalaev getting a KO, but that would still be a big fight feel for International Fight Week. Again, maybe because Ankalaev, that fight just took place not that long ago here. So I don't know if they would turn around and do this rematch right away if the guys are not ready. Sounds like Ankalaev is ready. We'd have to hear if Pineda's ready to go. So that's an option, I think, maybe, right? And then Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. I don't know how likely this is because this is supposed to be the last go for Dustin Poirier. And, it's supposed to be this kind of special card for Poirier and, whether it's going to be in New Orleans or whatever. I just don't know that they would move that to International Fight Week. I mean, I guess if their back's completely to the wall, they got to do what they got to do, but I could see them making some moves here to try to move this to International Fight Week and putting the BMF title on the line or whatever and doing Holloway versus Poirier here. And I know it kind of lost some steam because Holloway just got KO'd by Topuria, and it's weird. To me, that would be a disappointing headliner for International Fight Week. I think that's something that waits. They do it in New Orleans or whatever. It sounds like, Poirier, he was kind of hinting, and, Chael Sonnen was kind of messing with him on the broadcast. It sounds like it's going to be Holloway versus Poirier. We don't know for sure. But I could see them, if they're that desperate, moving that up, having Poirier go out, headlining International Fight Week. I think that's something that could be realistic. But again, I'm not sure. But the UFC's, they're running out of options here, man. They're running out of options here, given the landscape so far, unless they move a headliner and try to figure some different things out. This is going to be really tricky. And the one that would beyond save UFC 317, man, it would shut me up and shut everybody up, is if this John Jones versus Aspinall fight became the headliner for UFC 317. If that is the holdup, which I don't think it is. I don't think that this fight, if it does happen, I don't think we really see this until the fall, right? Because we know John Jones is kind of playing this game, trying to get as much money as he can, playing these kinds of games. And, so I don't know that this is what would happen for International Fight Week. But if it did, it would beyond save the card. It would be, this is one of the biggest fights they could put together. Like I've said before, would probably be at least one of, if not the biggest heavyweight title fight of all time inside the UFC. But the bottom line is this. The clock is ticking for International Fight Week. We basically have 2 months until this card, man. It's the biggest week of the year for the UFC. I know we get, these big cards towards the end of the year at MSG and stuff. International Fight Week is always huge. There's times we get 2 title fights in the main event, in the co-main event. So it's always a decked out card. It's a big moment where the UFC tries to highlight a lot of guys that they really want to push. The pressure is on, man. The pressure is absolutely on. I think that they're scrambling behind the scenes, and I don't think that this is the fight that would happen at International Fight Week. I think if this even happens, it would probably be sometime at the end of the summer or in the fall. But either way, if they pulled this off for International Fight Week, they'd shut us all up because, that would beyond save the day for UFC 317. But given the way things are going, man, it just ain't looking good for International Fight Week, and I'm getting concerned.